Good evening all. His Excellency Governor Martyn Roper, Honorable Sabrina Turner, Minister for Health and Wellness, esteemed speakers and presenters, members of the Healthcare Conference Organizing Committee, members of the listening and viewing public, good evening. Thank you for joining us for the 12th Annual Cayman Islands Healthcare Conference. My name is Ben Mead, and while I am the Marketing and Communications Manager at Health City, I'm here tonight as your MC, and I thank the Organizing Committee for entrusting the duty to me for this evening and over the course of much of the conference. Now, over the next couple of days, we have a packed agenda to get through, with a lot of important information around the conference theme, Breathe Easier. Now, before we get started, some housekeeping matters. For those of you joining us here in the room, we do ask that you ensure that your mobile phones are on silent to ensure as little disruption as possible. Also, we ask you to ensure you have on a mask. Our speakers will take theirs off when they come up, and having your mask on means your mouth and nose are both covered. And one more thing, I'll ask you to join me in taking a deep breath in and out. Let's go. And let's breathe easier. Thank you. I would now like to invite His Excellency the Governor, Mr. Martyn Roper, to deliver welcome remarks. Governor Roper has played a crucial role in the country's response to the COVID-19 pandemic and has been steadfast in his support of the efforts of the government and the medical community as they continue to work hard to keep the country and all of us safe. We are honored that he's able to join us today at this conference. Governor Roper.
Thank you very much. I will now remove this so I can breathe easier. Good evening, everybody. It is my distinct pleasure to officially welcome each of you to the 2021 Cayman Islands Healthcare Conference, both those gathered here and everyone joining us virtually via the CIG TV and YouTube channels or the Compass Media Facebook page. And congratulations on starting on time, which, as one or two of you will know, has not always been entirely possible at recent conferences like this. I know that the plan for this year was to host an in-person event open to the public as it was for the first 10 years. However, the recent change in regulations relating to indoor gatherings meant that the organisers had to revert to this mostly virtual format similar to 2020. Nevertheless, I am very pleased that the show will go on. Now, it's been almost a year since I addressed you in this forum, and at that time we were trying to re-envision life with a pandemic as expressed in the theme of the 2020 conference. We were thinking about how to navigate through the uncertainties surrounding COVID-19, separate the misinformation from the facts, and learn how to take care of ourselves both mentally and physically. The challenge then was to find our new normal, however that might look, and to accept it. We had the benefit of several healthcare industry professionals helping to guide us in the process by sharing their experiences on the front lines of treatment and research, providing us with the scientific data and sound advice and reassuring us that it would all be okay. Now, fast forward to today, and although we are now grappling with community-wide spread of COVID, we do have an incredibly powerful weapon in our arsenal to help us confront the disease, and that is, of course, the vaccine. And being vaccinated is what will help us to breathe easier, which is the timely theme for this year's conference. Community spread over the past few weeks has pierced holes in the incredibly safe bubble in which we have been living for the past 18 months. The stress and anxiety that has resulted in is understandable, but I continue to urge the community to remain calm and take much comfort in the fact that Cayman's vaccination rates, one of the highest rates anywhere in the world, give us a lot of protection. It is important that we seek to get these rates even higher, and I fully support the government's efforts in that regard. In addition, the availability of the Pfizer booster vaccine, and again, thank you to the UK for providing these to us, for our over 50 population should now add another layer of confidence that we are moving in the right direction and putting these islands in the best position for a cautious and safe reopening. Rollout of boosters to over 70s starts on Monday, and I know further information is coming on how this applies to other age groups. As I have said repeatedly, we must learn to live with COVID. It is not going away, especially because the Delta variant is so infectious, a game changer in this global pandemic. What does coexisting with this disease look like? It is choosing to not allow it to dominate our daily lives and affect our mental health and physical health. It is returning to the basics: hands, face, and space. That is frequent hand washing, not touching our faces, wearing face coverings where appropriate, as well as practicing social distancing. It means taking the necessary steps to protect and improve our overall health, but especially our respiratory health. Perhaps making lifestyle changes such as not smoking, being more aware of the air quality in our personal environments, eating a healthy, balanced diet, making regular visits to the doctor, and ensuring our children do these things too. Exercising is also important, and I'm very fortunate to be able to run on the beach every morning at 6 o'clock, and I know what a vital part of looking after my own well-being and mental health over the last 18 months, just running on the beach every morning in these beautiful surroundings means to me. And such behaviors can all contribute to breathing easier. Last year, I said that the Cayman Islands had an incredibly successful story to tell as it relates to our handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that is undeniably true today. The first chapter in our narrative tells how we assessed the situation in March last year and immediately took steps to lock down the country to try and keep the disease away from our shores. It speaks to how we listened to science and then adhered to the government regulations, to police regulations and the medical experts to help keep us all safe. And it describes the Cayman kind we all displayed as we looked out for our neighbours and those who were hit particularly hard financially by the loss of employment, and those dealing with being hundreds and thousands of miles away from loved ones. Indeed, it showcases the resiliency of the people of these Cayman Islands, the patience, the spirit of cooperation, and the compassion that we showed during a very difficult time. And our second chapter is being written even now, but I believe the highlights will include that same strength that was seen when COVID-19 first appeared. It will record a small Caribbean island in the top 10 list of nations with the highest vaccination rate and one of the most successful responses of any country anywhere. Furthermore, I think it will ultimately reveal a country that rebounds and flourishes in every sector as its residents thrive in the new normal, learning to live well in the COVID-19 era. Cayman can be immensely proud of how it has dealt with COVID so far. We are a highly successful British overseas territory with a superb financial services industry, excellent tourism product, and a community drawing strength from both Caymanian culture and its rich diversity. As governor for almost 3 years now, I am confident and optimistic about the future of these wonderful islands. To conclude, the next 3 days promise to be both informative and inspiring. I encourage you to use the wealth of knowledge that will be shared via this comprehensive agenda and delivered by some fantastic speakers. Use it to create an action plan to help move you and your loved ones forward on a journey that leads to breathing easier. We will all get through this next phase together. Thank you very much and enjoy the conference.
Thank you very much, Governor Roper. And before we move on, I would like to acknowledge the presence as well of Cabinet Minister, the Honorable Bernie Bush. As well, I'd like to say thanks to our top sponsors, Health City Cayman Islands, Doctors Hospital, Integra Healthcare, the Cayman Islands Health Services Authority, Astra Cayman MedCity, Compass Media, DART, and Kelly Holding Events and Communications. Of course, without our sponsors, we would not be able to host this event. So let's say thank you to them once again. I would now like to invite the Honorable Minister for Health and Wellness, Mrs. Sabrina Turner, to deliver her opening remarks. Minister Turner is the elected member for Prospect, and she has worked tirelessly since being elected to keep us informed and inspired. We are grateful for your leadership and commitment to making this conference a reality despite all of the challenges that the country has faced, especially in the weeks leading up to this conference. Minister Turner, welcome.
Now I can breathe easier. Good evening. I would like to add my welcome to His Excellencies and also thank each and every one here, along with those viewing virtually, for being part of this year's event. It is indeed my pleasure to lead the ministry's hosting of this 12th annual Cayman Islands Healthcare Conference, especially under the new portfolio's branding that now includes wellness. Indeed, the conference theme, Breathe Easier, speaks to what we hope to achieve with the wellness division of the ministry. That is, the promotion and facilitation of healthy behaviors that will result in better physical and mental health outcomes, not only on an individual level, but collectively as a country. I am excited that this important event has returned to its original 3-day format, although with limited in-person attendance due to the recently lowered gathering limits, even if we like it or not. It is yet another positive indicator of everyone's desire to return to normalcy. Even as this situation in the country remains fluid, I would like to thank the organizing committee for quickly pivoting once again and making the necessary adjustments to ensure the event takes place. Thank you to CIG TV for broadcasting the conference live on both your cable and YouTube channels, and thank you to Compass Media for your live stream on Cayman's Compass Facebook page. The Cayman Islands is in an incredibly unique and fortunate position despite the recent increase in numbers of COVID-19 community positive, much of whom are our children, and ages that are not able to get the vaccine. And people, we have to be thankful, are not very ill, nor has there been, up until now, any knowledge of mine, anyone requiring respiratory support. By God's grace and mercy, we will not get there as our vaccine uptake continues to climb day by day, giving our people the most needed protective shield. Our country's access to vaccine, our ability to act swiftly, even though some may seem it's draconian, and our ability to still move about relatively freely in our country, credit must be given to our professionals in the field, to you, the public, and most part complying, as hard as it may be, adhering to isolation and quarantine instructions are vital in the management and control of the invisible but very real COVID-19 virus. However, there are many of you who are anxious and uncertain about the future. and the dreaded fear of our country having to possibly go back into a lockdown again. These feelings are further intensified as we move towards the country's welcoming back larger number of tourists, the removal of quarantine for fully vaccinated travelers, and then the continuation of the phased to a full reopening. It almost seems that people are becoming overnight experts in COVID-19 disease, verifying their own version of what they believe to be truth based on their own beliefs, theories and treatments rather than listening to medical experts and the science. The fake news, conspiracy theories, and the suspicion around vaccine, I appeal, please cease. According to WHO Director General, we are not just fighting an epidemic, but also an infodemic. Fake news spreads faster and more easily than the virus and is just as dangerous, end quote. I would, however, encourage you to listen and analyze for yourself. There is so much misinformation circulating in the community. Please do not speculate. Check the sources and the supporting evidence. Only share information that is accurate and clear. Listen to our trusted public health professionals. You may have concerns such as medical, political, or religious reasons, and rightly so. But please go to your healthcare provider who will reassure and provide you with the information. It is envisaged that this conference will help us all prepare for these eventualities and better understand that, what experts as we learn to live with the risk of COVID-19 in our community. This is uncharted territory, but we must trust those who bring the expertise and give us guidance day by day. The reality is, we can and will enjoy life, prosper in the new normal, but it is incumbent on each of us to take personal responsibility for improving our physical and mental health in anticipation of what the new environment will look like. The committee has also collaborated with the public and private sector colleagues, as well as international partners, to put together a comprehensive, relevant, informative agenda that will address many issues we as individuals and collaborative are facing during this COVID-19 pandemic. More importantly, you will be giving practical advice and solutions to help you navigate these challenges and move towards a place where you feel you can breathe easier. It will be a full 3 days, but I believe it will be worth your time. We have an impressive and diverse lineup of professionals, experts in their field, who will offer thought-provoking and beneficial presentations on subjects relating to respiratory health, climate change, COVID-19, mental health, vaccines, alternate medicines, and more. First on the program is Dr. Binoy Chatanparambil. I got it right. Senior cardiothoracic, vascular surgeon, and cardiac doctor, who will bring remarks on behalf of Health City Cayman Islands, the conference main sponsor. Health City is a long-time supporter of this event and over the years has provided dynamic speakers who always bring a wealth of knowledge and expertise to the discourse that takes place at this conference. We look forward to hearing from the Health City presenters. Research suggests that threats from global pandemics and climate change are interconnected. Both crises affect the health, quality of life, and the livelihood of people worldwide, and are particularly challenging for small, low-lying islands like Cayman. COVID-19 has actually been described as a climate change in fast motion. Researchers assert that any investments in post-COVID recovery should address both threats. Around the world, some governments are already tackling both climate change and COVID-19, integrating climate action and climate resiliency into their recovery plans. We no longer can separate health policy from environmental policy. Our health heavily depends on climate and other organisms with which we share this planet. Therefore, if we want to help prevent the next pandemic, or even just reduce the spread of any disease, the environment must be taken into consideration. We are fortunate to have here Ms. Gina Petrie-Ebanks, Director of Department of Environment, to talk to us about sustainability and climate resiliency. She will outline some of the likely local impacts climate change provide, an insight into some of the steps that have been taken by government to discuss how we transition to a more sustainable, climate resilient society. Our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. John Lee, will close out our evening with a few remarks. Dr. Lee is Chief Policy Advisor of the Government on Healthcare Matters, and he is responsible for leading on national public health matters. I think I can safely speak for us as a country when I say that we are grateful to his calm disposition and his wise counsel over the past 18 months as we wage the battle against COVID-19. We have come back to look forward to hearing what he has to say. Tonight is definitely no different. Tomorrow morning, Dr. Josiah Bahat, consultant and pulmonology, critical care, and sleep medicine at Health City, will start today talking to us on the topic of chronic respiratory diseases, known as silent killers. These illnesses are often neglected, but are the leading cause of death. Some examples of lung cancer, cystic fibrosis, and sleep apnea. Dr. Bahat's decision will focus on COPD, asthma, and post-COVID-19 pulmonary fibrosis. These conditions contribute to us not able to breathe easier, but they are also preventable. And I am sure there is a lot that we will learn from this presentation. I'm also very excited about the session on complementary and alternative medicine. This will be led by Caymanian herbal medicine practitioner and medical doctor, Dr. Ebanks, who heads up the HSA's first complementary and alternative medicine clinic, catering to individuals interested in pursuing treatments that fall outside traditional medicine. As Caymanians, we know about properties of various herbs that our older elders are used to soothe and cleanse and heal, even if we do not employ them ourselves. Nowadays, this type of holistic, natural practice of medicine is becoming increasingly popular as patients seek alternatives to traditional medicines, using diet, exercise, vitamins, supplements, herbs and spices, and various types of blood therapies, body therapies to heal themselves. I believe we can breathe easier when we feel physically, mentally, spiritually whole, and this session will help us understand how to just get there. As a perfect complement to Dr. Bahat's talk, Dr. Awazat, see, I got one right, also a doctor's hospital, will also speak on the topic of current trends and standards care in the treatment of pulmonary respiratory malignancies, particularly lung cancer. We all agree that prevention is better than cure, but the advances that have been made in treating these diseases are incredible, and more importantly, available right here in Cayman. I think just knowing that we can be well taken care of right here, home, if we were to fall ill, is reassuring and itself a reason to breathe easier. Some of you may have seen the remarkable images around the world last year which showed the marked decrease in smog and other air pollutants in big cities due to the world essentially being locked down. Perhaps those people here in Cayman living with respiratory illnesses may have felt a difference in the air quality as a result of less vehicles on the road for about 5 months. Whether that particular exercise was real or imagined, the fact is that the quality of the air which we breathe in and out every day is integral to our ability to live healthy lives. In a panel moderated by Nellie Pucci, Chief Officer in my Ministry of Health and Wellness, Antoinette Johnson, Lab Manager from the Department of Environmental Health, Richard McRae, Environmental Social Governance Program Manager at DART, and Thomas Ferreira and Rosalind Flavelli, international consultants on the ReGen project, will talk to us on the topic of Clear the Air, ReGen's impact on air quality and human health. Attendees will learn more about how ReGen plans to transform Georgetown's landfill site into a green space and build state-of-the-art infrastructure that will improve recycling and turn your unrecyclable materials into electricity to power our homes and businesses, ultimately creating a cleaner and greener Cayman Islands. Reduced greenhouse gas emissions, less waste materials in the environment, and more green spaces all translate to a cleaner air for all of us, and in turn, improved health. For parents who are concerned about their children's health in this COVID era, you will want to attend a session on optimizing protecting child health in the post-closure era. Dr. Watkin, consultant pediatrician and neonatologist at Integra Health, will help parents breathe easier as she covers topics such as understanding COVID, its impacts in children, child health issues arising from reopening of Cayman, understanding and defining optimal child health actions and measures to both protect and to optimize child health and optimal health blueprint for happy, healthy children. Such a timely topic as we move towards reopening our borders to see positiveness in our children. We will also welcome Dr. Hazer, President of Medical Affairs at Baptist Health South Florida, who will present on COVID and long COVID. So much is being learned every day about long COVID. The symptoms are wide-ranging and differ from patient to patient. The long-term lung damage is particularly disturbing, and it is a complication that prevents victims from breathing easier. It would be remiss if I did not take the opportunity here to encourage everyone who has not been able to get vaccinated as yet or have chosen not to do so. Do so as soon as possible. The enduring effects of COVID-19 are not completely known, but what we do know is that they are serious and can be permanently changing in your life. I look forward from hearing more from Dr. Hazer on this important subject. As we come towards the end of a very full day, we will hear from someone who has been helping people in Cayman breathe easier for a long time. Ms. Shannon Seymour, Director and Clinical Psychologist at the Wellness Center, will give us advice on how to cope with anxiety in the new normal. Managing our stress and anxiety is a key to navigating life. Whether it is exercise, diet, therapy, medication, spending time with loved ones, embracing new hobbies, prayer, meditation, or something else entirely, we must all seek those alternatives, those activities or behaviors that calm our soul and help us to cope with the inevitable challenges that will come our way. Shannon will give us some practical advice and tools for how to find peace amid trials and not just move through life hoping to survive, but to actively thrive. Our last speaker tomorrow will be Dr. Jerry Bovell, a medical herbalist at Embodied Holistic Health, who, like Shannon, is concerned with improving our quality of life. Jerry does this holistically in conjunction with medical knowledge. She utilized plants and herbs as medication to treat or prevent physical conditions, illnesses, and allergies, and has worked with such ailments as diabetes, sleep disorders, allergies, digestive disorders, anxiety, stress, respiratory ailments, circulatory conditions, and inflammation. I hope that you are as impressed as I am with the variety of perspectives that are being presented at this conference. There is something for all of us, no matter what our beliefs are, on how to achieve optimal health. The options and solutions that will be offered will give us food for thought and perhaps challenge us to think differently as it relates to how to practice self-care. Our final conference day is a shorter one, but no less compelling. It begins with a presentation from Dr. Edward Fitzgerald, Head of Healthcare at KMG in Bermuda. Dr. Fitzgerald has written extensively on how COVID-19 has impacted the healthcare industry and how leaders in this important sector can build and sustain a resilient new reality. He has provided global insights, practical advice, and tools to clients around the world, and on Saturday, he will share some global lessons from recovery and resilience in healthcare. I think this will be a very informative one for everyone who works in this field. Sometimes an inability to breathe easy or deal with what life is throwing our way can lead to engaging in negative behaviors such as substance misuse and as a coping mechanism. Those individuals who are battling with substance disorders and trying to get better find themselves saddled with the stigma surrounding these deviant activities, which can push them further down the road of harmful behaviors. Raquel Tobian, clinical social worker and chemical dependency counselor at Infinite Mind Care, will be talking to us about suffocating from stigma. Topics she will cover includes understanding our implicit and explicit biases, examining our personal biases around mental health and substance use disorders, understanding why the stigmas around mental health and substance use disorder are problematic, and our personal responsibility in changing that stigma. Our final session on the last day of the conference is a panel about COVID-19 vaccines. This conversation is so necessary. COVID-19 spread across the globe faster than anyone could have anticipated. Despite Western nations having pandemic plans, most of them were caught off guard and definitely unprepared. The question, could we have done better? Will we be asked for years to come? This panel will tackle that very question, as well as talk about COVID-19 vaccine success stories. Dr. Lee, along with Dr. Charles and Dr. Cummings from the HSA, Dr. Patel from Health City, and Dr. Keys from Doctors Hospital will have the discussion. My hope is that it will help us all better understand the COVID-19 vaccines, as well as think about lasting impacts of the pandemic on the world. I think this is a great way to close out the conference, looking forward for the future. At this time, I would like to take the opportunity to thank our sponsors for helping make this year's conference a reality. We know that budgets continues to be stretched to their limits, so we appreciate the support that our local and international sponsors have given to this important event. to our esteemed speakers and panelists, both locally and those joining us from overseas. I thank you for being here to share your research, knowledge, and experience with us. Your input is invaluable, and we look forward from hearing from you. Finally, to the attendees here tonight and watching virtually, thank you for making this event making this investment in your health and committing to enhancing your lives and the lives of your loved ones by seeking out valuable information that will help you succeed. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time and enjoy the conference. God bless you all.
Thank you very much, Minister Turner, and I am indeed truly impressed with the variety on the agenda. There's something for everyone. If you're not able to join us, if you're watching from the comfort of your home or your office, you're not able to join us for the entirety of the event, there's certainly sections for everyone. And Minister, this is a testament to your ministry and the inclusive holistic plan for healthcare in the Cayman Islands. Now, speaking of healthcare in the Cayman Islands, I'll put on my day job cap, as I'm pleased to introduce the next speaker, who is also now ultimately my boss, Dr. Binoy Chattoparambil. He's a senior cardiothoracic vascular surgeon and cardiac doctor. But before he starts, here's a quick video from us at Health City, Cayman Islands.
It's reassuring to know world-class healthcare is right here at home. We have Cayman's most comprehensive suite of in-house services to diagnose and treat a wide range of diseases and conditions. Bringing together leading experts, the best technology, and the latest techniques, we work as a team to understand your health and ensure you get the best possible outcome. From your first appointment through to treatment and follow-up, your journey with us is seamless. Health City, world-class healthcare within your reach.
Good evening, His Excellency the Governor, Honorable Minister Turner, Honorable Minister Bernie Bush, other government dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first day of this year's Healthcare Conference. On behalf of Health City Cayman Islands, I extend my thanks to our host, the Ministry of Health and Wellness. We are grateful for their support to our medical and healthcare industry always. Thank you to the conference organizing committee for putting together an engaging program. It is Health City's pleasure to lend our support as a major sponsor of this year's healthcare conference. This conference over the years has a stellar history of providing us with access and exposure to the best and the brightest of Cayman's medical and healthcare community. When we met virtually last year, we all hoped that by this time, the pandemic would be under control. For over a year and a half, our physical health, our livelihoods, and our economy have been turned upside down by this COVID-19. And unfortunately, we find ourselves here at yet another semi-virtual conference. When COVID-19 hit the world, really had no idea what we are going to face. Its virulence, its transmission, the upending of daily life. And while the fight is far from over, we are transitioning to a new normal of living with COVID-19. There is no doubt that COVID is the most serious crisis the world has faced in a long time. However, through this crisis, our country has been luckier than most. The theme of the conference is Breathe Easier. Over the coming days, we have the opportunity to reflect on and share the lessons learned from the ways in which we have responded to COVID-19 in our homes, in our institutions, and across the healthcare sector. But more importantly, if we are to breathe easier, we must move forward collaboratively and collectively and look at the tools, resources, and roadmaps we need for our country to bounce back and emerge stronger than before. As Cayman's vaccination rates climb, we need to start moving to a calmer, more balanced and planned strategy to help us all learn to live with COVID-19. We cannot continue an elimination and suppression strategy forever. The high cost of this strategy is evident in the economy, in people's livelihoods and businesses, and our people's health and well-being. The good news is that it is possible to live with COVID-19 in our midst. With enough people vaccinated, COVID-19 can be managed. We can start to breathe easier. At the end of February 2020 last year, Cayman had its first COVID-19 patient, a cruise ship patient or passenger that was transported to Health City for care following a cardiac event and who later tested positive. As soon as we discovered the patient was positive, everyone at Health City moved into action. We worked together and followed protocols. We moved swiftly and worked with the appropriate authorities to ensure everyone's safety and contain the spread of the virus. We faced the challenges at that time head-on, and I am proud of our staff, the teamwork, the commitment and focus they showed. We worked closely with Chief Medical Officer, Public Health Cayman and Public Health England. There was sharing of information amongst the medical community, an unprecedented level of collaboration across all the disciplines and across the countries. A couple of months later, in April, Health City was strategically positioned to help organize the delivery of a shipment to Cayman of 30,000 PPE kits. Equipment, it was vital for the safety of our country's frontline healthcare workers. This procurement was no easy task. We spent countless hours, sleepless nights, and early mornings dealings with different time zones and all of the logistical hurdles, and that were many. But working together with our government, the HSA, and the Governor's Office, we got the kits here. I look back at those early months of pandemic to ask, what have we learned? What are the positive takeaways? At each turn, at each obstacle and challenge, it was teamwork, collaboration, and collective spirit that kept our country safe and through which we were able to achieve exceptional things together. Public and private partnerships, diplomatic teamwork across borders, a medical community and public health focused on a common goal, that is to keep our hospitals from being overwhelmed and to get our people vaccinated. We would not be where we are today if it wasn't for this level of collaboration. This sense of solidarity is critical as we ready ourselves to plan for our reopening. It will enable us to build a better Cayman together. At Health City, we are ready to do our part as an integral team player in our healthcare community. Our 104-bed hospital at East End has 47 beds in a dedicated COVID-19 ward, 11 ventilated beds in our medical intensive care unit, ready to handle COVID-19 cases should we need it. We can offer the highest levels of sophisticated life support technology with 3 ECMO machines for any patient who cannot sustain the oxygen level even with the highest ventilatory support with artificial ventilators. We have qualified and experienced staff. We have room for expansion should that need arise. With the exceptional level of preparedness our medical community has, with one of the highest level of vaccination rates in the world, and by following safety protocols, COVID-19 can be managed like other endemic diseases. The vaccines are highly effective at preventing severe illnesses, hospitalization, and death due to COVID-19, including from the Delta variant. We can stay safe and businesses can continue and lives can go on. By uniting as we face the next phase of the COVID-19 journey, we can stop holding our collective breath. We can begin to breathe easier. Let me finish. Finally, wish you an inspiring event over the coming days. I hope you find it very productive and informative. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you very much, Dr. Binoy, and of course, thank you again to Health City for stepping up as title sponsor for this year's conference. Now, next I have the pleasure of welcoming Mrs. Gina Ebanks-Petrie, the Director of the Department of Environment. She's going to come to talk to us about sustainability and climate resiliency. She has been with the Department of Environment for over 30 years and has been the Director of Environment since 1996. So who better could we get to present on this vitally important topic than someone who has made protecting the environment her life's work? Couldn't think of anyone else, so we have Mrs. Gina Ebanks-Petrie. Let's give her a warm welcome.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. With protocol having been established earlier, good evening, everyone here in attendance, as well as to those of you who are joining us online via Zoom. Climate change is making headlines with increasing regularity, and the news is signaling an increasing sense of urgency. I'm therefore very pleased that this year's health conference with the theme Breathe Easier has chosen to highlight the topic of climate change. And I'd like to take a minute to thank the Ministry of Health and the conference organizers for inviting the Department of Environment to present on this topic. I think this bodes well for the significant amount of work that needs to be carried out nationally in order to adequately prepare the Cayman Islands to respond to the wide range of predicted impacts of climate change on small, low-lying islands such as ours. I would also like to publicly thank my team at the DOE for all the assistance they have provided in putting together this presentation, particularly Ms. Wendy Johnson and members of her team within the Environmental Management Unit, Jerica Wood and Nathan Dack, who assisted with the research and the production of slides. It's truly been a team effort. The goal of my presentation this evening, which is entitled Building Climate Resiliency in the Cayman Islands, is to not only raise awareness in our community overall about how climate change is already affecting us and what we will need to expect and plan for in the future, but also to demonstrate the cross-cutting nature of this problem and hopefully help to show that climate change is not something that falls to the Ministry and Department of Environment only to tackle, but that it is in fact something that will require the buy-in and participation of every sector of our community if we are to be in a position to adequately respond to the myriad effects of a changing climate. So, what I will attempt to cover within the next 30 or 40 minutes is to unpack and provide a very brief introduction to the scientific evidence for climate change and speak briefly about the concept of climate resiliency. To discuss what we know about the range of current and expected impacts of climate change locally, to spend a few minutes looking specifically on the effects of climate change on human health. I will then finish up by speaking about what has been done locally in relation to a national response to climate change and building climate resiliency, and what plans are in place to build on and expand that work. and finally, to provide you, the audience, with an opportunity to ask questions, raise concerns, and provide feedback. So first, let's look exactly at what we mean when we talk about climate change. In its simplest form, the term climate change refers to the warming of the planet, often termed global warming, that is being driven by emissions of greenhouse gases and the resulting large-scale shifts in global climate patterns. It would probably help to also just ensure that we all understand what is meant by the words weather and climate. The difference between weather and climate is simply a measure of time. Weather refers to the conditions of the atmosphere which we experience over a short period of time, minutes, hours, days, weeks, and climate is the average weather in a place over many years, usually about 30 years. Climate change, then, is a shift in those average conditions. In addition to long-term climate change, there are shorter-term climate variations, which we all know about. This so-called climate variability can be represented by periodic or intermittent changes related to El Niño, La Niña, volcanic eruptions, or other changes in our planet's systems. So while there have always been natural variations in the Earth's climate, global temperatures are rising now because of human activities. Specifically, the world is about 1.2 degrees centigrade warmer than before people started using fossil fuels. These fossil fuels are different forms of carbon that are stored beneath the Earth's surface, such as coal, oil, natural gas, and they're used to power factories, transportation, and to cool and heat homes. Gases like CO2, methane, nitrous oxide, and water vapor released into our atmosphere as a result of burning fossil fuels trap the sun's energy and warm the planet. This is known as the enhanced greenhouse effect, and the gases are referred to as greenhouse gases. We refer to it as an enhanced effect because under normal circumstances, the greenhouse effect produced by the thin atmosphere covering our planet is what makes life on Earth as we know it possible. Burning fossil fuels means greater concentrations of greenhouse gases have disrupted this process and put the Earth's energy equilibrium out of balance. Today, the average energy leaving the atmosphere is less than the energy coming in, and our planet is warming. When climate scientists around the world began to become concerned about the far-reaching consequences of global warming, the World Meteorological Organization and the United Nations Environment Programme created the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, in 1988. The IPCC is an organization of governments that are members of the United Nations or the World Meteorological Organization, and it currently has 195 members. Thousands of scientists and other specialists from all over the world contribute to the work of the IPCC. The objective of the IPCC is to provide governments at all levels with scientific information that they can use to develop climate policies, and the IPCC assessment reports are also a key input into international climate change negotiations. For the assessment reports, IPCC scientists volunteer their time to assess the thousands of scientific papers published each year to provide a comprehensive summary of what is known about the drivers of climate change, its impacts and future risks, and how those risks can be reduced. An open and transparent review by experts and governments around the world is an essential part of the IPCC process to ensure an objective and complete assessment and to reflect a diverse range of views and expertise. Through its assessments, the IPCC identifies the strength of scientific agreement in different areas and indicates where further research is needed. In early August of this year, the IPCC published the first of its 6 assessment reports on the physical science basis for climate change. The report found that climate change is widespread, rapid, and intensifying, with scientists are observing changes in the Earth's climate in every region and across the whole climate system. Importantly, the IPCC concluded, it is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. This means that it is undeniable that human activities have warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land, and that widespread and rapid changes in the atmosphere, ocean, cryosphere, and biosphere have occurred. We're now going to take a quick look at the main lines of evidence that scientists use to substantiate these claims. The first line of evidence involves the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere today compared with CO2 concentrations pre-industrial times. Carbon dioxide has been present in the atmosphere since the Earth formed about 5 billion years ago. At that time, the atmosphere was mainly composed of nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and water vapor, which seep through cracks on the solid surface. A very similar composition emerges from volcanic eruptions today. As the planet cooled further, some of the water vapor condensed out to form oceans, and they dissolved a portion of the carbon dioxide, but it was still present in the atmosphere in large amounts. Early life forms, mostly microbes, could survive in this primordial atmosphere, but about 2.5 billion years ago, plants developed the ability to photosynthesize, creating glucose and oxygen from carbon dioxide and water in the presence of the light from the sun. This had a transformative impact on the atmosphere. As life developed, carbon dioxide was consumed so that by around 20 million years ago, its concentration was down to below 300 parts per million. When modern humans appeared about 200,000 years ago, atmospheric carbon dioxide was still around 300 ppm, and it did not exceed that concentration until the Industrial Revolution brought with it massive emissions from the combustion of fossil fuels. The second line of evidence is rising sea levels. Sea levels will continue to rise well beyond the year 2100, and the magnitude and the rate of this rise depend on future emissions pathways. This is what the report found, and the scientists have agreed this has a high level of confidence. In other words, the extent to which we experience sea level rise, which as the graph clearly shows is already happening, will depend on the commitments that countries make at the upcoming Conference of the Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, also known as COP26, which is being held in Glasgow in the UK in November of this year. For those of you who might be wondering, at our request, the Climate Change Convention was extended by the UK to Cayman in 2007. So the provisions of that convention apply to us. Back to the graph. Importantly, the red dotted line in the graph highlights another finding of the report, which is that the chance of exceeding tipping points, such as sea level rise due to collapsing ice sheets, cannot be excluded from future planning anywhere across the globe. It is also important to understand that the global climate system will not immediately respond to cuts in emissions. Some impacts, such as sea level rise, will not be reversible for several centuries after emissions fall. We are therefore locked into a certain amount of sea level rise, and we must address this in our local physical and economic planning. Obviously, a slower rate of sea level rise enables greater opportunities for adaptation in the human and ecological systems of small islands low-lying coastal areas, and deltas. This graph shows that human activities are responsible for approximately 1.1 degrees C or 1.9 degrees Fahrenheit of warming between 1850 and 1900, and averaged over the next 20 years, global temperature is expected to reach or exceed 1.5 degrees C of heating. In the scenarios studied by the IPCC, there is greater than 50% chance that the 1.5 degree target is reached or crossed between 2021 and 2040, with a central estimate of the early 2030s. We are talking approximately 10 years from now. So why is 1.5 degrees C important? Impacts are already occurring and will be much worse at 2 degrees C than previously projected. That means that 2 degrees C is no longer a safe goal to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, particularly for small low-lying islands such as ours. The co-chair of the IPCC working group noted, "We are already seeing the consequences of 1 degree C of global warming through more extreme weather, rising sea levels, and diminishing Arctic sea ice, among other changes." The co-chair of IPCC Working Group 2 says, "Every extra bit of warming matters, especially since warming of 1.5 degrees or higher increases the risks associated with long-lasting or irreversible changes, such as the loss of some ecosystems." Let's take a quick look at these helpful graphics from the Climate Nexus organization, which illustrate the possible effects of a higher increase in temperature on water, flora and fauna, sea level rise, and food availability under different temperature scenarios. So what this graphic is showing is that 1.5 degrees C is the stretch goal for the Paris Agreement, and 2 degrees C was the actual Paris goal. 3 degrees C is where we're headed if countries fulfill their current Paris pledges, and 4 degrees C is realistically where we're headed. In terms of impacts on water, this graphic just basically shows us that there will be severe impacts on water availability for populations around the globe, with more frequent and severe droughts occurring the higher the temperature. Impacts on flora and fauna are equally alarming. 1.5 degrees C already has us experiencing the loss of some 70 to 80% of our coral reefs. 2 degrees C, we see all coral reefs disappear, and I'll talk a little bit more about why that might be later. 3 degrees C, marine ecosystems may collapse, and at 4 degrees C, half of all plant and animal species face local extinction. In terms of impacts on sea level rise, the story isn't really any more uplifting. And I'll just leave you to have a quick look at that. You can reference these graphics for yourself on Climate Nexus. The other thing that I think we don't normally associate with climate change is the whole impact on our food security. And I would just like to point out that, you know, many of the staple products that we depend on, particularly those that are produced in countries that we import from, are already struggling under climate change. And at 1.5 degrees C, they will really start to suffer with their production. Agricultural yields are going to fall rapidly the higher the temperatures go. Some fish species will go extinct locally at 3 degrees C, and even before then. And at 4 degrees C will definitely be high levels of food insecurity. So We have all this knowledge available to us, but across the world, we continue to put 100 million tons of man-made greenhouse gases into the thin shell of our atmosphere every 24 hours. Locally, the DOE collects information from various stakeholders on an annual basis, and then we provide the data to the company which calculates the total UK emissions for reporting purposes. They then provide back to us emissions data from the raw data that we have provided to them. As you can see, and as expected, energy supply and transportation are the two biggest contributors to our local emissions. While our total local emissions are relatively insignificant, just over 1 megaton of carbon dioxide in 2019, the point is that they continue to rise. Even more alarming is where we stand in relation to our per capita emissions, which currently has us at approximately 15.1 tons of carbon dioxide, higher than Bermuda at 10.1, Barbados at 4.1, and our neighbor Jamaica at 2.7. We therefore need to address this, not only from a sustainability perspective, but also from a moral perspective. It will be very difficult to get up and make a case that the rest of the world has to cut their emissions to reduce our climate change impacts when we are unwilling to take a look at our own practices. I'm going to switch gears now from looking at the scientific basis for climate change and global trends and look in a bit more detail on what we know to be the predicted impacts of climate change in our region and in our island. The Caribbean Development Bank has long been cognizant of the need for increased knowledge about climate change and its effects in the Caribbean region. In 2017, the organization provided a grant of over 400,000 euros to the University of the West Indies through financing from the EU to implement the project State of the Caribbean Climate Report, Information for Resilience Building. The Climate Change Studies Group at the Mona campus within the Department of Physics was directly responsible for technical implementation of the project, and the report pictured here was launched in April last year. The report is intended to be a comprehensive, first-stop reference report that details the state of knowledge of climate variability and change for the Caribbean region at the time of its compilation. As the authors note, this report is expected to become the premise for actionable recommendations to improve the region's resilience across all levels and sectors. In summary, this is what the report says regarding the state of the Caribbean climate today, and the most likely state of the Caribbean climate in the not-too-distant future. So essentially, what it's saying is that today we're already experiencing increasing temperatures, and in the future, that will continue. Today, we have more variable rainfall. In the future, we can expect variability of rainfall and more drying, particularly in the northern Caribbean region, which is where we are located. More extreme events in terms of hurricanes, droughts, floods, etc., are already happening. I'm sure you're not immune to hearing about these on the news. And those are predicted to increase in the future. Similarly, sea levels are already rising, and we expect to see them continue in the future with up to almost a meter of sea level rise predicted by the end of this century. So, what do these physical climate change projections mean for us in real terms? At a high level, this is what the report says. All of the effects of temperature, sea level rise, and reduced precipitation will have impacts on our ecosystems. We will see loss of biodiversity and species range shifts. For our coastal infrastructure, we can expect erosion and inundation of coastal lands, we can expect increased costs of protection of those vulnerable assets on our coastlines. For water resources, we expect to see changes in precipitation, less precipitation, and water quality and water supply issues. There will be other economic impacts. We will see an increased cost of living, for example, from the increases in the cost of cooling our houses. I'm sure that I don't have to explain to anyone here that your electricity bill is one of the highest items on anybody's household budget. We also can expect to see a decline in tourism and instability in our insurance industries as they struggle to cope with increased claims due to losses from hurricanes and other events. Agriculture and food security will also suffer. Crop yields, irrigation demands, pest management will become a problem. And last but not least, we can expect to see a range of health-related impacts: heat-related deaths, infectious diseases, air quality, and respiratory illnesses. Let's look a bit more closely at what the report says about some of the potential impacts on our marine and terrestrial biodiversity. In the terrestrial environment, adequate shading and soil moisture are essential for seedling development and survival in our dry forests. Since soil moisture is directly related to rainfall, a drying Caribbean will lead to higher seedling mortality and impact species diversity. Less rainfall also makes our terrestrial plant communities more susceptible to fire. From a marine biodiversity perspective, sea level rise threatens sea turtle nesting areas. We're already experiencing this here in Cayman, and the DOE is increasingly having to relocate turtle nests, which would be threatened during tropical storms or periods of heavy wave action. Increasing temperatures are also expected to affect the sex ratios of sea turtles, since their sex is determined by the incubation temperatures in their nests. The expectation is that there will be a decline in the number of male turtles. While the data are still not conclusive on how our mangrove communities will respond to sea level rise, it is possible that they will migrate landward in response to changing ecological conditions brought on by inland movement of the sea and saltwater intrusion into our groundwater. Seagrasses, which are also critical to the survival of juvenile stages of many of our local marine species, such as lobster, conch, and many species of fish, which eventually migrate onto our reefs, can only tolerate temperatures 2 to 3 degrees above normal summer temperatures. The expected increased intensity of hurricanes will damage most of our native ecosystems, dry forests, mangroves, and even coral reefs, and are also projected to impact migratory bird patterns. Warming seas will promote the northern migration of Caribbean grazers like parrotfish, and there is even data collected locally by the DOE and our partners in our grouper moon project to suggest that the larvae of our iconic Nassau groupers are likely at the upper limit of their thermal tolerance. Increasing sea surface temperature will also lead to further coral bleaching events across the region. As we saw earlier, coral reefs are extremely sensitive to increasing temperatures as they already exist close to the upper limit of their thermal tolerance. Bleaching is a normal response for increased temperatures. The level of thermal stress they are experiencing, together with the fact that they now exist in oceans where the pH of the water is declining due to increasing amount of carbon dioxide, that is, it's becoming more acidic, the carbon dioxide being absorbed out of the atmosphere by the oceans. And this is deeply concerning for the future survival of these highly productive and very attractive ecosystems. It is therefore critical that we do everything possible to ensure that our reefs remain as healthy as possible and are not regularly subjected to additional man-made stresses such as pollution and sedimentation. This is just a slide with a bit more information on coral bleaching. And just to underscore that coral bleaching is directly linked to climate change, as one of the main causes of coral bleaching is thermal stress. While we don't observe widespread bleaching on our reefs every year, these are increasing in frequency and severity with climate change. Unfortunately, corals which have been stressed by bleaching also become more susceptible to coral diseases. There's information on the DOE's website about coral bleaching if any of you really want to get into how that works. The report also notes that continued coastal development, particularly development which does not respect established coastal setbacks or which is permitted to occur in the active area of our beaches, together with the continued removal of natural barriers like mangroves and even seagrasses, will increase exposure of our coastal infrastructure such as roads, airports, ports, utility poles, water pipes, cemeteries, housing, hotels, and other tourism infrastructure to flooding and erosion due to sea level rise. All of these will be exacerbated with the impacts of tropical storms and hurricanes on our coastlines. In terms of water resources, as I mentioned, we expect to see less rainfall. When the rain does fall, it will come heavier, causing flooding and soil erosion. We can expect salinization of our groundwater because sea levels will rise and will move, and that interface between our groundwater and the seawater will move further inland. And the other point I think that I would like to make here is that in Cayman, we're very fortunate that we have potable water produced by desalination, but desalination is an energy-hungry process. So that in itself, we need to take a look at in terms of the sustainability of even the way we get our drinking water, our potable water. Coupled with the projected milder winters in North America and Northern Europe, our tourism industry will likely be threatened by reducing appeal of the islands as favorable destinations. So we can expect, for example, to see loss of our beaches due to sea level rise and more intense hurricanes, coastal inundation on a regular basis, damage to critical infrastructure, and degradation of our coastal ecosystems such as coral reefs, and of course, these are all big attractions for our current visitors. In addition, the tourism industry may suffer from climate change mitigation measures implemented across the world, such as levies on aviation emissions, which would increase overall the cost of air travel. Due to climate change events and human pollution, sargassum influxes now represent significant threats and contribute to ecological and socioeconomic disturbances in our country. Recent sargassum influxes in the Caribbean are thought to be related to human impacts, primarily the input of extra nutrients into our marine environment, usually from the discharge of treated sewage, and climate change. So sargassum, we've also seen, have a significant impact on our marine flora and fauna simply by masking out light that is essential for seagrasses and coral reefs. But we also have seen hugely significant impact on our recreational beaches just because people can't get to them, and possible impacts on human health that arise as the sargassum starts to break down and release, among other things, hydrogen sulfide. So we then have air quality issues. I mentioned that there would be other socioeconomic impacts like increased cost of living, instability in the insurance industry. But one interesting fact that I'd like to share with you is that Climate change is also expected, and this was from the State of the Caribbean Climate Report, to affect students' academic performances, especially where there's not adequate cooling, for example, in classrooms. Think about that. That is something that I think we all need to take on board. And obviously, there was already documented in other parts of the world, not so much here in Cayman, again, because of our excellent public health system and the efforts of MRCU, but in many, many countries around this region, there is a great loss of productivity almost every year due to vector-borne diseases like dengue, malaria, chikungunya, etc. Agriculture and food security impacts will arise as a result of decreased precipitation, increases in agricultural pests and diseases, the effect of extreme events such as hurricanes on agricultural infrastructure and on the plants themselves, reduction in water quality due to saline intrusion into groundwater resources, and accelerated soil erosion and salination caused by rising sea levels. The effect of this will be a reduction in crop yields, loss of marine resources due to degradation of ecosystems such as coral reefs, disruption to food security, and loss of employment and income earning. We're now going to spend a little bit of time looking at climate change health implications. The WHO Director General is quoted as saying that the risks posed by climate change could dwarf those of any single disease. The current warming trend is of particular significance because it is unequivocally the result of human activity. And I think that the fact that the WHO Director General has made this statement is pause for us to think about all of the effects and the impacts and what's happened in our country since and worldwide since COVID-19 has emerged on the scene. And here we have the WHO Director General saying that the risk posed by climate change could dwarf the effects of COVID-19 in effect. This article basically says that climate change is the greatest threat to public health, top medical journals warned. The editorial, which was published in leading journals such as The Lancet, the New England Journal of Medicine, and the British Medical Journal, says the world can't wait for the COVID-19 pandemic to pass before addressing climate change. No temperature rise is safe, the editorial says. In the past 20 years, heat-related mortality among people over 65 years of age has increased by more than 50%. Higher temperatures have caused increased dehydration and renal function loss, dermatological malignancies, tropical infections, adverse mental health outcomes, pregnancy complications, allergies, and cardiovascular and pulmonary morbidity and mortality. All of these disproportionately affect the most vulnerable, including children, older populations, poorer communities, and those with underlying health problems. This next graphic shows the wide range of health outcomes as a result of climate change. The slide illustrates the most significant climate change impacts: rising temperatures, more extreme weather, rising sea levels, and increasing carbon dioxide levels, their effect on exposures, and the subsequent health outcomes that can result from these changes in exposures. In terms of specific impacts in our region, increasing temperatures will result in warmer seas that may contribute to toxic algal blooms and increased cases of shellfish poisoning, as well as ciguatera, reef fish poisoning. Hotter temperatures may also lead to more vector-borne diseases. High temperatures speed up the life cycle of the mosquitoes and the disease organisms they harbor and make adult mosquito bites more deadly more often. Increasing temperature may also cause reproductive problems in both men and women. High temperatures may lead to reproductive problems in men due to the relationship of repeatedly raising testicular temperature by 3 to 5 degrees and decreased sperm counts. Exposures of pregnant women to increasing temperatures may lead to hyperthermia, which may result in a high incidence of embryo deaths and malformation of the head and the central nervous system. Climate factors will increase respiratory problems across the region. Higher temperatures, humidity, and Saharan dust will increase the incidence of asthma, bronchitis, and respiratory allergies across the region. Inhalation of air pollutants from fossil fuels and waste incineration will lead to more respiratory illnesses. Higher temperatures and humidity stress the body's ability to cool itself. Heat stress can lead to heat-related illnesses such as heat strokes and cramps. In extreme cases, it can become fatal. The heat island effect will exacerbate the impact of increasing temperatures. More frequent and severe extreme events may lead to disastrous public health consequences across the region. Extremes such as hurricanes, tropical storms, and floods can cause adverse effects in food production, deaths by drowning, more mental health cases, increases in infectious diseases, and population displacement. In terms of rainfall, water storage during droughts may lead to more vector-borne diseases. Storage of water during droughts in drums, for example, provides suitable habitat for mosquitoes, which is why we always hear MRCU here locally telling us to empty any containers that may catch water. Malnutrition from disturbances in food production may also occur, and drought also affects sanitation due to the lack of water affecting the transmission of disease. Not a very pretty picture. Furthermore, we do know, for example, that thawing permafrost is a massive contributor in the Arctic, is a massive contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, as stores of Arctic soil carbon are released to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide and methane. A recent article in Nature Climate Change says that a rapidly warming Arctic could also spread the previously buried nuclear waste from the Cold War and release undiscovered viruses and antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Okay, I need to change to my next slide, and it's not working. Thank you. An online article published by the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health posed the following questions. Question: climate change and global health policy are largely treated as separate issues by the public and the media. Do we need to adjust our thinking? The article then went on and provided the following answer. Yes. The separation of health and environmental policy is a dangerous delusion. Our health entirely depends on the climate and the other organisms we share the planet with. We need to bring these communities together. Some progress has been made in addressing the risk of pathogen spillover from animals into people, but largely we still view the environment and life on Earth as separate. We can and must do better if we want to prevent the next infectious pandemic. This means that we must combat climate change and do far more to safeguard the diversity of life on Earth, which is being lost at a rate not seen since the dinosaurs, and more than half of life on Earth went extinct 65 million years ago. Many of the root causes of climate change also increase the risk of pandemics. Deforestation, which occurs mostly for agricultural purposes, is the largest cause of habitat loss worldwide. Loss of habitat forces animals to migrate and potentially contact other animals or people and share germs. Large livestock farms can also serve as a source for spillover of infections from animals to people. Less demand for animal meat and more sustainable animal husbandry could decrease emerging infectious disease risk and lower greenhouse gas emissions. Many governments met the threat of the COVID-19 pandemic with unprecedented funding. The environmental crisis demands a similar emergency response. Huge investment will be needed beyond what is being considered or delivered anywhere in the world. Insufficient action means that temperature increases are likely to be well in excess of 2 degrees, a catastrophic outcome for health and environmental stability. Critically, the destruction of nature does not seem to have parity with the climate element of the crisis, and it is instructive to note that every single global target to restore biodiversity loss by 2020 was missed. We therefore are facing an overall environmental crisis, and I think this graphic really captures the thought. As with the COVID-19 pandemic, we are globally as strong or as weak as the combined response allows. So, given the magnitude of the problem, is there anything that we can collectively do? I came across this graphic and it resonated with me for a variety of reasons, so I thought I'd share it. If nothing else, I'm hoping that it will lighten the mood a bit after all that bad news. Seriously, all is not yet lost. There is hope, and there are still things that we can do to avert the worst-case scenarios of climate change. As we have heard previously, limiting warming to 1.5 degrees C or less is critical to the future of our small and vulnerable islands. If the world takes very ambitious action to curb emissions in this decade, we can still achieve this. However, small-scale efforts will not be sufficient. We will need rapid and transformational change. A recent report from the World Resources Institute notes that if we think of this in terms of the global carbon budget, the total amount of carbon dioxide we can emit and still have a chance of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees was only 400 gigatons at the beginning of 2020. Assuming recent global emissions levels of 36 gigatons per year, which is roughly equivalent to 10 years before we exhaust the budget. While global emissions dipped due to COVID-19, they have bounced back very quickly. We therefore have to change the way we use and produce energy, make and consume goods and services, and manage our natural environments. Technologies that remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it are under development and are being trialed as we speak, but they cannot yet address the scale of the problem we face. Natural approaches like planting trees and not removing natural areas such as wetlands, which are some of the best natural systems at sequestering carbon, are also helpful. The report concludes that while achieving the 1.5 degrees C target will be difficult, there are also opportunities in the type of transformational change required, which can lead to betterment for societies, better quality jobs, and health benefits. It will be crucial for countries to put forward stronger emissions reductions targets and commit to net zero emissions by mid-century, if not sooner, so that we can give ourselves a decent chance for a safer future. This now brings me to my last few slides, which will look at what exactly do we mean by being more climate resilient and what actions are being taken by the Cayman Islands government to build climate resiliency in our country. It has to be said that the creation of the new Ministry of Sustainability and Climate Resiliency is the strongest signal yet from the Cayman Islands Government that it intends to prioritize pursuing a sustainable development path for our country and recognizes the tight connection between sustainable development and building climate resiliency. There is so much that could be said about sustainability and the Sustainable Development Plan for our country, but that is a whole different presentation. What I would like to do, though, is to look a bit more closely at what it is meant by climate resiliency or resilience. The National Academy of Science defines resilience or resiliency as the ability to prepare and plan for, absorb, recover from, and more successfully adapt to adverse events. Many of us are probably familiar with this equation. Risk is vulnerability times the threat. The Center for Climate and Energy Solutions Climate Resiliency Portal says that to maximize both the type and the effectiveness of a climate resilient strategy, public and private sector organizations should follow a two-step process to plan for resilience investments. The first step is to understand the risk, both the threat and the vulnerability aspects, and then to decide whether the risk will be mitigated, transferred, or accepted. Managing risk requires addressing either the threat or the vulnerability, or both, depending on the situation. In terms of climate risks, it's too late to eliminate the short-term threats by reducing one of the major drivers of climate change, greenhouse gas emissions only. The impacts of climate change, such as sea level rise, drought, and more frequent and severe weather, are already here. And as such, it is important to address climate vulnerabilities and make the nation more resilient. That said, cutting greenhouse gas emissions, such as carbon dioxide, can reduce how fast the threat grows and help lower future long-term risk. Addressing both climate threats and vulnerabilities is the most effective strategy to reduce overall risk. In climate change terms, this involves pursuing one of two options: mitigation or adaptation. Mitigation essentially attends to the causes of climate change. Adaptation addresses its impacts. Mitigation measures include reducing national emissions, primarily through the uptake of renewable energy, sustainable energy technologies, and energy efficiency regulations and practices. They also involve the designation of protected areas, which can sequester carbon and serve as carbon sinks. A recent article by Professor Robert Twilley of the Louisiana State University notes that carbon sequestration by mangrove forests is the amount of carbon that accumulates in wood or soils each year and remains stockpiled there, isolated from the atmosphere where it can cause climate change. In total, the world's mangroves sequester about 24 million metric tons of carbon in soil per year. A mangrove forest on the Pacific island in Micronesia can store as much carbon annually as a tropical rainforest in Panama. Since the passage of the National Conservation Act, we have managed to increase our protection of mangrove wetlands, but we still have a long way to go. Earlier this year, we were also able to increase the amount of our narrow coastal shelf, which is protected in strict no-take areas, from approximately 14% to just under 15% on average for the 3 islands. These no-take areas contain healthy seagrass beds, which are also excellent at sequestering carbon. As the Blue Carbon Initiative explains, although seagrasses account for less than 0.2% of the world's oceans, they sequester approximately 10% of the carbon buried in ocean sediment annually, 27.4 tons per gram of carbon per year. Per hectare, seagrasses can store up to twice as much carbon as terrestrial forests. Let's take a quick look at adaptation measures. These include the identification of potential climate change impact in climate-sensitive sectors and the implementation of practices, incentives, and infrastructure to reduce the susceptibility of predicted impacts. This list here is a list of adaptation measures that we could implement in the Cayman Islands with enough will. We need to embed resiliency measures into our development and planning legislation and policies and ensure robust enforcement of those pieces of legislation. We need to look at restoring ecosystems and at reforestation of areas that have been cleared. Engineered coastal protection will become a reality for us. Water management, stormwater management, and rain catchments are going to be really important. They already are. We all experience flooding from time to time during heavy rainfall. Flexible and diverse cultivation needs to be prepared for natural disasters. We need to take a look at our agricultural sector and what's happening there. Active modes of transport like biking or walking can help reduce traffic-related air pollution and also encourage physical activity, which has many public health benefits, including reduced rates of obesity, heart disease, and diabetes. In Cayman, we have 2 documents which incorporate both adaptation and mitigation measures from a climate change perspective. The draft National Climate Change Policy was developed under a UK-funded initiative between 2009 and 2011. There was a very large cross-sectoral committee that basically contributed to the development of this policy. Unfortunately, there was no uptake at the political level, and it remains in draft form. The other is the National Energy Policy, which has been formally adopted and which includes targets for emissions reductions and the adoption of renewable energy as follows. 70% of our total electricity generation is to come from renewable sources by 2037. 70%. We are nowhere near that. By 2020, total peak greenhouse gas emissions not to exceed 12.3 tons of carbon dioxide per capita. You've seen that we're already at 15.1. By 2030, emissions per capita to reduce to 4.8, which is in line with the Paris Agreement. Under Darwin funding from the UK, the Cayman Islands government has also embarked in the process of creating natural capital accounts, which help us to ascribe monetary values to our natural assets through the valuation of the ecosystem services provided by them. As explained in this graphic, the interaction between built, social, human, and natural capital affects human well-being. Built capital and human capital, which we know as the economy, are embedded in society, which is embedded in the rest of nature. Ecosystem services are the relative contribution of natural capital to human well-being. They do not flow directly. It is our hope that the Cayman Islands government will eventually be in a position, through this work, to publish natural capital accounts alongside traditional measures of economic health, such as GDP, as a means of giving a more comprehensive picture of the true state of well-being of our population and our country. Other climate action locally has included, for example, an FAO and Department of Agriculture Food Security workshop, which was held here in 2011. PAHO and the Ministry of Health, Environment, Culture and Housing hosted a climate change and health workshop in 2019. We have many provisions in the National Conservation Law supporting regulations, species conservation plans, and protected area management plans that will help us to build climate resiliency. The draft National Planning Framework needs to be passed, it needs to be comprehensive, it needs to include consideration of climate change and biodiversity loss. And lastly, we need to continue monitoring our greenhouse gas emissions. Finally, what are some of the planned and pending actions to build climate resiliency? First of all, I'm very excited to tell you that we have, through the Governor's Office and with help and funding from the UK, the Ministry of Sustainability and Climate Resiliency has organized for a climate change risk assessment to commence in November of this year. Some of you may be contacted to assist with identifying risks, scoring them, and ranking them for the health sector. So when you get the call, please help. We also are going to use that information as a means of updating and adopting national climate change policy. The Premier has said that this is a priority for him. We also need to update and aggressively implement provisions of the National Energy Policy, and I'm very pleased to announce, too, that that is also part of the Ministry's agenda for this term of the current government. Updating our development and planning legislation is underway in terms of the Plan Cayman for Grand Cayman, but there is an urgent need to create and adopt development plans for the sister islands. The sister islands, as many of you may know, they have no development plan, which is worrying and something that needs to be addressed. We need to agree an institutional framework to coordinate climate change actions nationally, as well as to monitor progress towards implementation of climate change. And finally, I would just like to make a plug for the collection of relevant data across all sectors. In Cayman, we have traditionally not been very good about collecting data, probably because we don't have any kind of tax system here, so there's not really an imperative to do that. But I would suggest that the threat of climate change really does require us to think again about what we need in terms of information to guide our policies and our plans from a climate change resiliency perspective. And that includes the health sector. So I would encourage you to have some discussion about what are some of the indicators of health-related effects of climate change and whether we ought to be collecting some of those data so that we can promote appropriate policies and plans. Lastly, I'm just going to take a very brief minute because people always say, what can I do? This always seems so hopeless. Across the globe, climate scientists say that people can help by reducing their reliance on cars, taking public transportation, cycling, switching to electric cars, properly insulating their homes, taking fewer flights, and, believe it or not, eating less meat and dairy. And because that has a health sort of theme to it, I just wanted to share this graphic with you, which shows that the production of beef and dairy, which is the cow's milk, which are two of the largest red circles, actually have bigger emissions than global air travel. That's something to think about, something to consider in terms of personal responsibility and climate change. I'm being told my time's up, and I'm at my summary, so I guess that's a good sign. I just would like to say that almost every nation on Earth signed up to the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015. The Paris Agreement aims to keep the rise in global temperatures well below 2 degrees C this century and to pursue efforts to keep it under 1.5 degrees C. The new IPCC report just published in August this year says that under all emission scenarios considered by the scientists, both targets will be broken this century unless huge cuts in carbon take place. So, in summary, we've heard and seen, human-induced climate change is already happening, and predictions are for it to continue increasing. How we respond will be critical for our collective future. For small, low-lying islands like ours, keeping global warming to 1.5 degrees is critical. The highest level of government needs to advance this climate change agenda. Climate change considerations need to be integrated into all national decision-making. Climate change effects across all sectors need to be monitored, documented, and appropriate action taken. Finally, each of us needs to play our part in reducing our impacts on the environment. Because he's one of my heroes, I'm going to end with a quote from the inimitable David Attenborough. Human beings are the greatest problem solvers our planet has ever known. We are just yet to apply ourselves to this problem with the scale and urgency it requires. And I'd like to leave you with this short video clip from The Lancet.
The COVID-19 pandemic has given us a glimpse of a possible future. It has shown us that when health is threatened on a global scale, our way of life is brought to a standstill. But threats to global health will grow, and the disruption that follows, if we don't take action to address climate change now. The Lancet Countdown brings together 120 leading scientists and health experts to track how the world's changing climate is impacting on our health. This year's report reveals the most concerning outlook yet. Climate change is fueling a health crisis that threatens every continent, country, and community. No one remains untouched. From small islands to big cities, climate change has driven an increase in the number and intensity of extreme weather events. Heat-related deaths in people aged over 65 have increased by more than 50% in the past 2 decades, with older people in Japan, northern India, eastern China, and Central Europe most vulnerable. People living in countries such as Bangladesh, South Africa, and Ethiopia face a future of undernutrition. Warmer temperatures, flooding, and drought put food security at risk. People's exposure to wildfires has risen in 128 countries, compared with 15 years ago, aggravating heart and lung conditions. Recent fires in North America and Australia have claimed lives and livelihoods. Climate suitability for the spread of infectious diseases such as dengue and malaria is rising. Climate change, coupled with other environmental harms, could increase the risk of new pandemics. Climate change impacts us all, but the vulnerable in our world will feel its health harms most acutely. A brighter future is possible. Responding to climate change by reducing global carbon emissions will bring immediate health benefits through cleaner air, healthier diets, and more livable cities. 3 million people die prematurely each year from heart and lung diseases linked to ambient particulate air pollution. Cleaner air inside and out would prevent a large number of future deaths. A further 1 million deaths in 2017 were associated with eating excessive red meat, a risk factor for diseases such as cancer and heart disease. Promoting healthier diets around the world would save millions of lives, while reducing significant emissions from livestock. Time is short. Our failure to respond to climate change is damaging the health of the world's 7.8 billion citizens today. If we don't act now, we will condemn each other to a future of climate-induced health shocks. The global pandemic has presented the circumstances from which to reset. Responding to these converging crises offers a triple win: protect public health, promote sustainable economies, preserve our planet. We must now choose the world we want to live in.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Ebanks-Petrie. That was certainly an informative way to start this conference. I have several questions for you, but I won't burden you now. And I'm sure there are people in this room and those viewing and listening online and on TV have questions. You can go to the Cayman Islands Healthcare Conference social media platforms and send in your questions there. We'll do our best to get the answers to you. And we do know from this video a brighter future is possible, so we can all breathe easier knowing there's something we can do collectively. Now, our final speaker for the evening needs no introduction, really. He makes my job here very, very easy. He's been the face and the voice of the pandemic here in the Cayman Islands, whether in the press briefings or in the community updates. He has helped keep most of us calm over the past several months. Ladies and gentlemen, help me in welcoming Dr. John Lee.
Thank you very much, Ben. Good evening, everybody. Protocol having been established, I just want to add a few words before we get to go and have a little relaxation after this evening's excellent events, before we close this session. On behalf of the Healthcare Organizing Committee, I'd like to thank His Excellency the Governor, the Honourable Minister Turner for joining us to bring greetings and to show their support for this very important event. I think it's probably now around my 9th healthcare conference that I've been involved in, not quite all of them. I think there have been a surprise for my minister tonight, because I don't think she knew I owned a suit. But I do. I have a few in my wardrobe, but I'm warning you all, you might never see one again. Dr. Benoit and your Health City team, thank you very much for joining the ministry yet again this year and being the title sponsor. I'd also like to thank all our other sponsors, and special thanks, of course, to the Organizing Committee, who have had significant challenges in bringing this all together, and, as we all have realized, some very last-minute and unforeseen angles and challenges being thrown at us. The challenges of last year or the 18 months up to today have really tested human ingenuity and resilience, and it's also brought a lot of hardship and heartache. But I make no apology for what I'm about to say, and I thank Gina Ebanks-Petrie hugely for her presentation. The biggest issue of our time is climate change, and that is the biggest challenge to human health. We need to pay attention to this. It's not for somebody else to do, it's for each one of you individually to pay attention to. The reason that we probably have the increase in diseases on our planet is because of pressure on nature from us, from humankind. So whether you're a politician, a developer, or you know a decision maker, a homeowner, or you're a parent, or you're a maturing adult, it's your decisions that are going to make a change here. We need to make better energy choices, better building choices, better food choices. Societies need to make decisions about how we grow and how we develop. We cannot just continue to consume Mother Nature's resources. We have to look at ourselves and stop and pause and think and change. We are encroaching so much on the world, but this is owned by every living thing, not just the people in this room, but every living thing owns the world we live in. So, but the good news, as Gina said, is we can do something about it, and that is really positive. We can use Caymankind and extend that to our view of nature and what we do in the world around us. It's a really powerful message, and I hope you will take that away. That is what I wanted to send to you today, but now I thank you very much. Please enjoy the conference very much and your further evening this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lee, and to all of our speakers this evening. Now, thanks as well to everyone who has been joining us across the various platforms, whether it's CIG TV, the CIG TV YouTube page, the Cayman Compass Facebook page. Here's a reminder, If you missed part of this evening or you won't be able to join us tomorrow, you can always go back and view the conference presentations there. We'll also be loading them up to the conference website, healthcareconference.ky, a bit later on. I just want to say to all of our sponsors, Health City Cayman Islands, Doctors Hospital, Integra Healthcare, Astor Cayman Med City, Cayman Islands Health Services Authority, Kelly Holding Events and Communications, DART, Compass Media, Cineco, the Wellness Center, Baptist Health International, and Infinite Mind Care. Thank you very much. Without you, this event would not be possible. So we're asking those of you viewing to join us tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. We'll be starting on time. Thank you very much, and good night.